Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Melanin Reset Podcast. I am your host, Valarie Winn, and in this episode, I am still talking about being Black in America. I told y'all last week that I identify as a Black African American, and I knew when I said that I needed to go deeper, especially after I asked you guys, do you know who you are? Do you know who you are? Black people in America have been called Negro, colored, Black, and African American. But do you know who you are? And how did we get from Negro to African American? Has it ever occurred to you that how you identify determines to a degree your self-worth, and how you identify as a people affects our intrinsic value? Our intrinsic value, what is that? What is intrinsic value? I know you guys probably are used to it being affiliated with something more tangible than human beings, but our intrinsic value is our perception of our inherent value as a living, breathing individual or living, breathing individuals. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter. It flows off our lips like water. But do we really understand who we are? If we did, then we would know that Black lives do matter and that Black lives are sacred. Let me say that again. Black lives are sacred. You see, when you say it like that, it hits you differently, doesn't it? Black lives are sacred. That's why it's so important that knowledge of self be known. It is very important that we know thyself. Know thyself. Know thyself. I say that all the time. Know thyself. I write it in my group. Know thyself. Knowledge of self makes you move differently. It hits differently. In his book, The Miseducation of the Negro, Carter G. Woodson wrote, "The education of any people should begin with the people themselves, but Negroes, thus trained, have been dreaming about ancients of Europe and about those who have tried to imitate them." Let me say that again. The education of any people should begin with the people themselves. But Negroes, meaning Negroes, colored, Black, African American, thus trained, meaning as a result of indoctrination, have been dreaming about the ancients of Europe and about those who have tried to imitate them. Now, who was the father of Black history talking about when he said those who have tried to imitate them? Negroes are dreaming about those who have tried to imitate them. Who was the them? Which brings me to my next question. Do you know who the ancients of Europe, Rome, Greece emulated or copied from? Do you know? So let's break this down this way. Asians come from Asia, right? Europeans come from Europe, right? But where did the word, or where did Negroes come from? Let me say that again. Asians come from Asia, right? Europeans come from Europe, right? But where did the Negro come from? Have you ever asked that? Have you ever asked yourself that? Have you ever asked a teacher that? Let me know in the comments what were some of the answers. Did you research it for yourself to see where did this come from? I'll tell you where it came from. The transatlantic slave trade started with the Portuguese, and they were the first Europeans to enslave Africans. And they were the first ones to call the enslaved Africans Negroes. Now, why did they call them that? Negro is an adjective which means black in Portuguese or in Spanish. So at the beginning of the slave trade, enslaved Africans were called Negroes. And we know that they got the enslaved Africans out of Africa. Okay, so the premise of that is African. Negroes came from Africa and Negroes are African. Now, hold on. Let's go back to the question I asked previously. Do you know who the ancients of Europe, Rome, and Greece emulated or copied from? Remember what Carter G. Woodson wrote. The education of any people should begin with the people themselves. So let's get this education. Let's get it. The Greeks went to Africa to sit at the feet of the masters or the master teachers. You guys are familiar, especially if you have school-age kids, you're familiar with STEM, STEM. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So, all of those subjects were already there in Africa. Writing, medicine, religion, or spiritual systems were already present in Egypt. Now, let me clarify. Egypt is in Africa. Egypt is the modern name for ancient Kemet. Okay? And when the Greeks went into Africa, that's where they went, to ancient Kemet. And the Greeks went into Africa over 2,500 years ago. So Egypt, that's the modern day term for it, was already ancient and civilized when the Greeks got there. But we know how the story goes. The Greeks, the Romans, the Asians, so on and so forth. Okay? So they went to Africa, to the black lands. That's what Kemet means. The black people. That's what Kemet means. The land of the blacks. That's what Kemet means. They went set at the feet of the master teachers in what we call now modern day Egypt. It was ancient Kemet then. Okay, and that was over 2,500 years ago. The civilization, as I mentioned, was already ancient. Kemet, the land of the blacks, or the black land, the black people. Kemet. When you guys have time in your research, just Google Kemet and dig for the information. It is there. It is there. So the civilization in Egypt, Kemet, was already ancient by the time the Greeks got there. The Great Pyramid was over 3,000 years old, and the Sphinx was even older than that by the time the Greeks went in there to learn. So when the Greeks came on the scene, all of this stuff was already there. the science, the mathematics, the astrology, the astronomy, the writing. They had their own alphabet. It is called hieroglyphics now, but that was the language, the meta nature. So much came out of Kemet, and there's so much that we don't know, that is unknown to us, well, some of us, and that we're learning. There was a lot that we had to unlearn and relearn. There will be a lot that you have to unlearn and relearn, because we've been misled and miseducated. And that was intentionally done. So the Greeks went into Egypt to learn from the great teachers. And those people, those Egyptians, were ancient Egyptians. And it is a scientific fact, those people were black. They were Africans. Because if you don't know, Egypt is in Africa. Egypt is on the continent of Africa. So the Greeks went there to learn from the Africans and to learn what the Africans were doing. They went to the Egyptians, who were black Africans, to learn from them. Then, about 300 years after that, after the Greeks went into Egypt as students, their descendants and generations after them returned to that land as conquerors. And they destroyed the libraries, the temples, the cities, all of that. And they claimed the African knowledge as their own. I have a book called Stolen Legacy. This is what happened. They stole our legacy. Let's keep connecting the dots. They stole Africa's legacy, and with the birth of the slave trade, the Europeans, stole Africa's people and enslaved them and called them Negroes. Furthermore, y'all know enslaved Africans were not allowed to be educated. They were not allowed to learn how to read nor write. They were forbidden, because we all know knowledge is power. And knowledge leads you to liberation. It is the key to liberation. So when one of them did learn, they would teach another one. Remember last week I told y'all, each one teach one. When one of them did learn how to read, they would teach another one how to read. And that's how the knowledge was passed along. When one learned how to write, they would teach another one how to write. And that's how that was passed along. Okay? Each one teach one. It's just part of our heritage. So, we know where the word Negro came from, or the label Negro came from. So, what I see as an identity was more or less a self-conscious shift from Negro to colored, then from colored to black, and then black to African American. However, as more of the invaders went into Africa, different races of people started coming. There's some white South Africans now. So that's why I told y'all last week that I identify as a black African American. Okay? That is my race, that is my ethnicity, and that is my nationality. Black African American. Okay. And so it's our great scholar, Anthony Browder, who wrote in one of his essays, the thing that I want to share with you tonight, because I knew this podcast wasn't going to be long. He said this. He said, as a free people, we have a responsibility to educate ourselves and rediscover our African identities. Knowledge of self is the key to unlocking the door of the future. Know thyself. Know thyself. Know thyself. We are African people, and we are more than we have ever been told. We have a history that has been the greatest story that has never been told until now. One of my favorite African proverbs, and I think I shared this with you guys on the first episode of the Melanin Reset podcast. Anyway, the proverb reads as this. It says, until the lion tells his side of the story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Let me read that again. Until the lion tells his side of the story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Well, I'm here to tell you, we are roaring now. Just pay attention. You got people that's coming out there against critical race theory. Now, critical race theory is a theory that is taught on the college level. It has never been taught in grades K through 12, but we have parents that are storming into school board meetings that don't want their kids to be taught this. And these are in predominantly white districts all over the United States of America. Do you know why they don't want their kids to be taught that? Because they want their white supremacy to abound, the lives that they're comfortable with to abound. Also, last week I told y'all in the podcast that we as a people in America, we have to examine the white supremacy in us. What are the things that we have done to perpetuate that system unconsciously? There are some things that we learned as kids that we were raised to do that perpetuates that we have to do better now that we know exactly what it is. Okay? Some of the things I had said once, some of the things that we call in southern states, southern hospitality, has been a way to appease or to respect white folks in America. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Don't get me wrong. We've been taught that's mannerable. And I have no problem saying yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir, to my elders. However, to my equals, no. Okay? So that's one of the examples of some of the things that we were taught in order to appease white people during that Jim Crow era, during the times of slavery, and just the black apartheid that happened here in America. Okay? So remember that proverb, until the lion tells his side of the story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. Another thing we can grab from that, we have to tell our own narratives. We can no longer afford to let them come in and hijack our narratives. We're going to mean what we say and say what we mean. Period. Point blank. And we're going to correct them when they try to tell our stories wrong. Now, what we're not going to do is, they said such and such and get mad about it or soak over it for days. No, it's not worth that. We're going to write our narratives. We're going to tell our stories, and we're going to control our narratives. Period, point blank. The lions are roaring. Okay? And all we need to do is just pay attention. So, with that being said, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share, and click the tiny bell if you want to be notified when the next episode of the podcast is dropped. The visual podcast is available on YouTube, and you can find the audio version of the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, and other podcast platforms. Thank you for joining me. It is always a pleasure. And this has been your realest homegirl, Valarie Winn. And I will talk to you on the next Melanin Reset podcast. Peace.